Okay, friends, it's time to begin. It's time to get going. I am issuing strict time limits on our speakers today. So here's what we're going to do. The way we're going to try and run this is to have Mazin first, and then Mark talk for 10 to 15 minutes each. And then I want us to open it to conversation and questions and dialogue. So those who are still out in the hallway out there, if you're able to come in and join us, that would be great. But without further ado, why don't I turn it over to you, Mazin? Take it away, and we are in your hands.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for your interest. I'm going to skip a lot of slides because of time limits, but who is Palestine? What is Palestine? Palestine, as I mentioned, is this land bridge between Africa and Eurasia. It's where humans migrated out of Africa to the rest of the world. And it is part of the Fertile Crescent, where first humans developed agriculture, where we first domesticated plants like olives, wheat, barley, lentils, chickpeas, and so on, hummus, and also animals like goats, sheep, camel, donkeys. These are the indigenous people of Palestine. The DNA, our DNA, is pretty much the Levantine DNA, the Canaanitic DNA. I wrote a book called Sharing the Land of Canaan. But anyways, the people of the land, of course, got different religions and backgrounds and cultures. And this picture from 1932 shows religious and secular leaders getting together to object to the Balfour Declaration, which is the idea to establish Jewish homeland in Palestine, Jewish state in Palestine. The reason those people objected to that is because they liked this diversity. They liked having, various religions, various languages. It was multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual. Before 1948, 44 languages were spoken in Palestine. We lived in harmony with each other and with nature, with rich biodiversity and rich human diversity. If there's a message I want you to take from my short talk, is that human diversity and biological diversity are good for us, and that colonialism and the mentality of empire that Mark spoke about in his sermon is basically harmful to both, harmful to biological diversity, harmful to human diversity. And so the ethnic cleansing of Palestine that also Mark spoke about meant over 500 Palestinian villages and towns were depopulated. And this is a process that we Palestinians call the Nakba, catastrophe, and it has been going on since 1976. It is not since 1948, so 76 years. It is not a one-day process or a one event or something like that. This is similar to what happened here in this country with the indigenous people of the country. Of course, the shrinking of the land that's available to the indigenous people. And in fact, this map of shrinking Palestine was first drawn by my son, because he saw that map of the shrinking United States, what became known as United States. This is settler colonialism, and it is very harmful to the environment, destruction of our trees, of our land, diversion of our rivers. So the River Jordan, which Jesus was baptized, used to look like the picture on the upper right left-hand corner, and flowing at 1,350 million cubic meters per year. Now it's barely a stream that flows at 20 million cubic meters per year. You can walk across it or even jump across it. This is what's happening, and our studies show that this colonization also impacts the environment. This is our most recent study on Gaza that we submitted just before I came on this trip, showing the destruction of tree cover in Gaza. And you can see it started in the north and spreading to the south. So in the north, it's nearly 94% damage of tree cover. In the south, it's catching up now as Israel destroys the south of Gaza covers. The same thing for greenhouses. This is destruction of greenhouses. By month in Gaza, this is using remote sensing where we could map every greenhouse in Gaza. And you can see again, starting in the north and spreading to the south. But also the destruction is related to all of humanity, because as this Guardian newspaper study has shown, in the first 60 days, with only 254,000 flights over Gaza, these jet flights, all of them American jets, of course, F-15s and F-35s, produced 281,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. And that's more, just from jet fuel alone, more than the Central African Republic produced in a whole year from all its industries, all its automobiles, kitchens, etc. And that's the first 60 days. Of course, now it's, you can multiply that by 7. There's been destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza, destruction of churches and mosques in Gaza. 3 churches were destroyed. One of them is the third oldest church in Palestine. Destruction of museums, destruction of universities. I wrote a research paper on scholasticide in Gaza and the destruction of the university systems and the educational systems in Gaza. There's destruction of the truth, as you know. If you want to know more about Gaza, by the way, you can go to a website called ongaza.org, which tells you the truth. But Israel also tried to silence the truth by killing journalists. 195 journalists were killed. That's more than what was killed during the Second World War. These are just some pictures of some of those journalists who were killed. And finally, I want to just show you a short video of our institution, the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability, which is a way of nonviolent resistance, basically, in Palestine. I'm Mazin Qumsiyeh. From my childhood, I used to go to the valleys, especially with my uncle, Sana'atullah, who was the first Palestinian zoologist. He finished his PhD in the US, and then unfortunately he died in a car accident a few months after he finished his PhD. His dream was to eventually build a museum of natural history. He didn't get to do that. But as a child, I committed to finish his work, following his footsteps. My wife and I, after we returned from the US, we donated $250,000, and we started this Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability in 2014, and the museum grew faster than we expected.
From its beginning 10 years ago, the museum grounds became an oasis of peace and an amendment for people from around the world seeking to help people and nature.
في 2014 بلشنا على تطوير هذا الموقع من مخزن للأثاث المعدات لمواد البناء. اليوم الحقيقة تطورت، صار في عندنا مسارات تخدم الزوار، تخدم كمان الباحثين. الحقيقة النماذجية تخدم الزوار للتعرف على بعض النماذج التعليمية زي المركزية، أنظمة الزراعة المائية والاستزراع السمكي، الحديقة المجتمعية بالإضافة لحديقة أطفال.
This institute serves as a great and unique educational tool for all kinds of people, whether students like I was, children, women, educators. We worked with more than 12,000 school students and more than 20,000 international and local visitors. Our natural history exhibit is also a great tool to teach people and show people all of the biodiversity found in Palestine. We also have a mobile educational unit, which is basically a museum on wheels that we take all over the West Bank to marginalized communities that are not able to reach us.
Our institute at Bethlehem University had miraculous achievements that are detailed in our 10-year anniversary booklet. Some of them include leading the efforts to create the national report for the Convention on Biological Diversity, create the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, as well as formulate a new protected areas network. We developed valuable collections including thousands of invertebrate and vertebrate specimens, herbarium specimens, hundreds of zoological and paleontological specimens, rare and antique books, as well as ethnographic, historical, or cultural items. The Institute at Bethlehem University has become not only a national institute, but also a regional and global institute and a destination for researchers and visitors from around the world.
In terms of research, we published 128 research publications. We have also conservation efforts. We did community service, working with farmers, with marginalized communities, with women, to empower them, to make sure that they follow their dreams like we followed our dreams.
The museum here is an oasis in the midst of the occupation and the war zones. It is a beautiful place to preserve nature and learn about the biodiversity of Palestine. I am learning so much as I volunteer here.
حابة أشكر المعهد على جهودهم المثيرة في تعريفي على التنوع الحيوي في فلسطين من خلال الفعاليات التي شاركت فيها، حيث زاد حبي واهتمامي لطبيعة بلادي، وأدركت أن يجب الحفاظ على بيئتنا لأنها أساس المستقبل.
I'm addicted to love of this institution and all it stands for. I love to volunteer here and observe nature and busy people working to leave this world a better place for future generations.
I followed the dream of my uncle, and with the help of these volunteers and my wife, we were able to achieve more than we expected in those 10 years. I want to thank our volunteers and our staff and everybody who contributed to this project. Thank you. We now have less than 100 square meters for exhibits, though we are building a new facility that will expand our previous facility by tenfold. This building will have over 1,100 square meters, and it will have exhibits about the history of Palestine, including the history of the Palestinian Nakba, the destruction of our society as indigenous people. So I think it will be a magnificent museum that will draw millions of people over the next 10 years. This new facility can be completed. We now have 2/3 of the funding for it. There's a lot more to be done. You can support us by either donating cash or donating in kind. You can also donate your time by coming and working here as volunteers. All of this can happen with your support, with your help. Thank you. So, as mentioned, we would love for you to support this project. If you are capable of supporting, small amounts are welcome. But also, if you are capable and you want to have a wing named after you, or part of the building, or something, the elevator, for example, the handicap access, or the garden, or the fountain, you will have a name in Bethlehem in perpetuity, basically. So yeah, the last thing I want to say is, again, you know, it's truly an honor to be here. I love this country like I also love Palestine, but I love Earth, you know, the planet Earth. And we indigenous people believe planet Earth is a living being. And we respect the land, the soil, the stones, the rivers, all of this. And we consider humans as also part of nature. We're not separate from nature. We cannot live actually without nature. You know, nature can live without us, but we cannot live without nature. So it is very important for us to preserve nature. And since I think what I talked about there as hope, you know, it is essential, you know, this is like an oasis of hope in Bethlehem. It's an oasis which tells people, look, there is a future. It is possible to live together. I mean, one of the volunteers I was shown quickly in passing is actually a Jewish Israeli who lived with us for 2 years. 2 years she lived with us, putting to the lie the idea that we cannot live together. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Baha'i, Druze, atheists, anybody. We welcome that diversity. So if there is any message that I want to leave you with, is that diversity is good, both human diversity and biological diversity. And the two are connected. And those who attempt to destroy diversity, creating monolithic societies, a Jewish state, a Muslim state, or a Christian state that's uniform, whatever, are really misunderstanding God's design on this earth. You know, God's design is to create us different and to have us live together. And even at the time of Jesus, there were Christian, you know, people followed him, people didn't follow him. And there were people of various ethnicities, Arabs, you know, Jebusites, Judaic people, Samaritan people, Galilean people like his mother, you know. These are the people who lived there and continue to live there, by the way. Never have we had ethnic cleansing until the 20th century. Never in our history. Despite the notions that you may see in the Old Testament about, because that also there's contradictory elements in the Old Testament. In parts of it, it says, for example, Joshua was told to kill the Canaanites, etc. In another part of the Old Testament itself, it says Joshua came, met the Canaanites, and even intermarried with them. Intermarried with them. So which part of the Bible you want to choose is up to you, but the Old Testament. The New Testament is very clear, and those of us who believe in the New Testament is very clear about what is required of us. So that's all my preaching for. So where is Mark? Feel free to put your email or scan the barcode. If you know, I am not good at barcode scanning, to put your email. If you do handwriting of your email, please make it legible. Otherwise, you will never hear from me again. The second thing the last thing I want to say is you would be, how many of you have been to Palestine so far? Raise your hand. Wow, good number, about a third or 40%. So the rest of you, please come, and those who came before, please come again. Don't be intimidated by conflict or whatever. Please come again. We'd love to have you there, and we consider, you know, safety comes from one source, that's God only. So, thank you.
To say real briefly before Mark begins, I do hope that we can get back to Palestine to be able to visit Mazin at his institute sometime soon. It's a space of unbelievable beauty, and I just wanted to read this quote to you because I think it pertains to what Mazin says, or has done rather. The quote is this from a poem called A Brief for the Defense. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. Yes, we need to focus on injustice, but what Mazin has shown us is that we also need beauty. We also need this space of incomparable delight in the midst of vast injustices. What Mazin has created is a space of delight. So, with that, Mark, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. I want to turn it over to you. I just want to say that to you all, it's really been a privilege to be doing this sort of mini tour with Mazin. And I've been to the garden, right, to the museum, and you're building it. It's happening now. I just saw the video of it. That's fantastic. It's fantastic. I had to confess, Mazin and I did some talks in Boston just in the past few days, and it may be hard for you to believe that sometimes I feel speechless. Since apparently I just gave the longest sermon in history. Congratulations. But I had been feeling like I don't know what to say. I mean, I've been going around the country and around the world giving talks for like 18 years. Never been at a loss for words, but I feel like we are at a real critical turning point. That there's really a need for a reset in terms of the movement for Palestine. And we really are at a Kairos moment, and I'm not quite sure what to say anymore about what it is that we're supposed to be doing. Because clearly, when we were talking about a Palestinian state, when we were talking about ending occupation, et cetera, it ain't working, right? The settler colonial project, which had been in the planning since the 30s, since before Hitler, by the way, is proceeding apace. When I first went in 2006, I wrote back to my wife, I said, this thing's done. It's happened. There's the license plates. There's the 2 sets of roads. There's the wall. There's the set. This thing's happening, and it's just getting rolling, and it's happening. So what do we do? What do we do? I was just talking with Mark, and I want to address a question that he brought up. I said, you have to ask a question, but it's fine, I got it in my head. What I found myself saying to him was, there was another conversation in the back of the room, but a woman asked me, does Jewish Voice for Peace, do they listen to them in Israel? That's not the question. The work of Jewish Voice for Peace and of all of the groups that are working here, doing campaigns to support for Palestine and the advocacy, et cetera, the action is here. The people in Israel, it used to be that there was a joke, it was not funny, that Israel used to have a left wing. People on the left in Israel. And the joke was, the saying was, there are 50 organizations in Israel, of Jews in Israel, who are working on the left to try to change Israel and Israel's policies. It's the same 50 people. That's even more true now. And a friend of mine, Eitan Bronstein, you may know of his work. Years ago, he said to me, pretty soon, I'm going to be a criminal. All of my work will be outside of the law. And I've written about this in my book as well. There are voices inside Israel. And those voices are saying, we can't do anything from the inside. We are part of this. We can't change anything. We need you to change that. So there are two things. One is we need to continue to invite Palestinians here, and we need to continue to go there so that the Palestinian people can continue their resistance, which means to survive and to thrive and to continue with their way of life. They ain't going anywhere. It's really, really important, and I'm sure Mazin will agree with me, that they know that we're here and that we're with them. That's really important to help preserve that society. The other thing is, and then we need to continue, that if Israel were to lose the support of the United States of America, it would collapse the next day. Israel can't go on without us. So we have that power. Now, what kind of power we have in this country today to change policies, foreign policy as well as domestic policy, it's always been a question. It continues to be a question. It's even more of a critical question now for us in this country, that our country has now shown its the true face of our settler colonial white supremacist DNA. But that's our work. And this is bigger than Palestine. I hope I tried to make that clear in my sermon. You unpack Palestine, you unpack the whole story. It's one piece. It's not just one people's liberation struggle. Okay, it's what's happening in the world today, and it's not going in a good direction. So this is much, much bigger than Palestine. And I think it empowers us, it empowers me, anyway, to think about it that way. I don't remember who was it who said, maybe somebody here can help me out, the only cause worth fighting for is the lost cause. So, you obviously don't accept any cause as a lost cause, but you have to, the hope springs from that realization that it ain't going to be easy. I mean, I think of that Braverman again and that amazing quote that he wrote, looking good on the wood. You know, you pick up a cross. And this has always been, this gets me to my next point, which is my conversation with Mark, whose wife is Jewish. And things in the family now are a little bit more tense than maybe they were before, right? My message to Christians, and you know I don't talk to Jewish groups, I figured out early on that my ministry, my mission, and whatever power my voice has, would be to talk as a Jew to people who aren't Jewish. And I've been known to say many times over the years, I get that you need me to be Jewish. Don't convert, by the way. Please don't convert. Stay Jewish. We need you to be Jewish. We need your Jewish faith. And they've said that to me. I said, don't worry, there's no question about me converting, but I get that you need me to say things that you feel you can't say. I said, I'll accept the assignment for now. But I pray for the day when you don't need a Jew's permission to follow Jesus, to be a follower of Jesus. You don't need me to preach to you about what Jesus tells you to do. What is that? The charge of anti-Semitism leveled against people who are criticizing Israel or who wonder about this Zionism thing, it's not new. It started back in the 70s when a bunch of Jewish neocons coined the phrase, the new anti-Semitism. Criticism, because people are starting to question about Israel, they say, no, it's anti-Semitic. The new anti-Semitism now is criticism of Israel and the Jewish people and our Jewish homeland project. Criticize Israel, you're clearly an anti-Semite. Okay? That was a good strategy. That's what I would have done if I were them. To shut people up and to shut it down. That's on steroids now.
APAC.
Well, yeah, I mean, APAC is only one player. You know, you have the U.S. Congress. You have, what's her name, who's now going to be on Trump's cabinet. Yeah, Elise Stefanik, who's buried into the careers of 3 university presidents, right? Just like that, lift a little finger.
36 states.
36, right. So it's now happening at the state level, where it is going to be illegal to do what we do. So, how do we deal with this charge of anti-Semitism? The churches have made enormous strides in that direction. I remember, this would have been back in 2008, somebody from the Methodist Federation of Social Action asked me to come to the Methodists before they have their big conference. They have them every couple of years or whatever. They have this thing where they get all the delegates come together. Methodists are very methodical. They come together and they have all the delegates come and they have panels where they start to hear people talking on different sides of resolutions that they're going to be considering at their big convention. And so they said, we know what the other side's going to say. We know what the Jewish voices from the other side are going to say about this resolution to divest from Caterpillar. Can you come and speak to that? I said, sure. And I was naive at that time. I was just getting going, understanding what this church business is all about and how the churches operate on these things. And so I came. And so in this big conference room, there's a panel for and against. And the Methodists, they did not want to pass this resolution because apparently they had real fun. It was going to hurt them financially to try to divest from Caterpillar. It wasn't going to hurt Caterpillar. I mean, they had maybe a couple $1 million invested in the pension funds in Caterpillar. That's a nickel of Caterpillar. But the optics and the perception was very, very, very strong. So they said, well, we can't do this because it's not right. And basically, it was all about the money. So this rabbi gets up. They program it so that they were to decide who is going to be recognized from the floor to speak after the panel speaks. So they're going to be called on. So there was somebody from the Wiesenthal organization, which is a Jewish advocacy organization like ADL, or APAC, or federations. And I knew who this guy was. He gets up. It was before I spoke. No, it was after I spoke. I got up and I said, look, this is not anti-Semitic. Judaism is not Zionism. The Jewish people is not the state of Israel. The state of Israel is a sovereign state. It's doing the wrong thing. It says right there in your telephone directory size book of procedures that you cannot be invested in activities which are against your principles, against basic human rights. Presbyterians have one, the Episcopal families have one too. It's very, very clear that your money can't be invested in any things which are not peace promoting. It's a question of human rights. So it seems to me it's clear that you can't be invested in Caterpillar because this is what Caterpillar is doing. Or Hewlett Packard, or Honeywell, or any of these other organizations that we're finding out about. So, I'm telling you as a Jew, we're in big trouble with Israel. We've got to get this figured out. So, you may be told that this is anti-Semitic. I'm telling you that this is about loving Jesus. It's not about loving the Jewish people, but if you want to love the Jewish people, it would be an act of love to pass this thing. I thought I did pretty well. Right? And people actually applauded. They weren't expecting to hear something like that. I had 90 seconds. I did it in 90 seconds. After me, this rabbi stands up. And I'll never forget this. He didn't use, he used maybe 20 seconds. He said, I know you're being told that passing this resolution would be anti-Semitic. I know you're being told that it's not anti-Semitic, but I gotta tell you, to us, it feels that way. And he sat down. It did not pass. All he had to do was lift his little finger and say, it doesn't feel good to us. Don't do this to us. I thought you were our friends. It was powerful then. It's more powerful now. And it's a major, major, major barrier. That's barrier number one. Barrier number two, I'm from near Seattle now. I'm working with a group of an ecumenical group in Seattle. They've been very impressive. They've been doing this stuff for 20 years. Mostly Episcopalians, some UCC, some Methodists. Been working in the churches and with the Diocese of Washington. And they have been unsuccessful for 20 years in getting down to the actual churches. Nothing's happening in these congregations, maybe a sprinkling of congregations. It's like over 100 parishes, Episcopal parishes in this one diocese. If you talk to those rectors and those priests, and you talk to those church leaders, they hear about this, but they've never heard about this. It's not happening. It's not being preached. It's not being part of their church education. It's just not there. So I've just moved there, so I dropped in and said, well, let me work with you on this. Maybe we can do something different. It's a different world now. Everybody sees that Israel's committing genocide. You know, maybe this is an opportunity. And so we got started. Here's what we're running into. The pastors and the priests still don't want to touch it. What do they say? They don't say, we think this is, we're not saying this is not important and we don't feel strongly about this and the Palestinians are in trouble and Israel is doing wrong things. They say, it's a contentious issue within my congregation. It creates conflict. And when you go right under that, what it's really about is, I don't want to lose members. We're already hemorrhaging. I don't want to touch it because my job as a clergy person is to have money to fix the roof and to pay the rent. How do we bring a prophetic message to these church leaders? One way is, and I've heard this from clergy, they say, hey, I need to hear from my congregants what they want to hear about. I said, are you running a democracy here? You've been hired to preach. You've been hired to bring the word. Right? You know, if you're a bishop, you're supposedly descended from St. Peter. You've got the direct word from God. That's your job. I tell you, I don't know what to do about that. You know, if we could reproduce the First Congregational Church of Old Lyme throughout the whole country, that would be beautiful. If we could produce Bruce Shipman, who was a chaplain at Yale until he published an article, a letter in the Hartford, in the New York Times, and it said something about how it protested that the Debka group that was brought here, the dance group was brought here, was anti-Semitic because they danced a dance that showed about Palestinian resistance, right?
I also, this was 10 years ago, when I said that the increase in anti-Semitism around the world, which was the subject, is abetted by Israeli policies in Gaza.
Right.
And the Gaza war, Israeli policy is causing an increase in anti-Semitism. I said, until the Palestinian issue is acknowledged and some progress is made on resolving it, it's only going to get worse. After saying that 10 years ago, I was labeled and eventually had to leave.
You were
And
fired.
so much for free.
Well, sort of.
Life is unfair. My own board of the Episcopal Church of Yale did not support me. I was making trouble needlessly.
Thank you.
I was raising subjects that were uncomfortable and not productive to chaplains. And I got no support. And the president, he felt like he just left, you know. But he refused to talk to me. He had just spoken to the Christian about free speech principles on campus.
Yeah.
It did not extend to me, who was not a Yale employee, but working as the Episcopal chaplain under my own board.
Yeah, and so.
And it did not extend to me at all, and I did not have the right to say
Right.
that. And I was labeled.
So campuses, that's another place. I mean, so there are places where these voices can be raised.
And students today are saying that they're uncomfortable. The comfort level, pro-Palestinian protests and advocacy makes some students uncomfortable, and on that level, they're being banned from campus.
Right, well, there's the anti-Semitism thing. We're making it
Again, same
unsafe
thing.
for Jewish students.
And that's why so many Christian friends are afraid to say anything. They see a no-win situation that is too costly. And that's why we depend on Jewish voices of conscience
Yeah.
to say what we know is true, that our own experience is that we're not very effective.
So let's take questions.
Let's open it up to questions and conversation. Thanks.
Okay, and for those who have to leave early, there's a basket there if you want to donate to our institute. If you write a check, make it to Bethlehem University Foundation. It's 501c3, tax deductible. So Bethlehem University Foundation basket is there. Bethlehem University Foundation. Okay.
And the wing will be named after you.
Yes.
Okay, questions? Go ahead.
I just want to continue what you said. The article I read yesterday, Columbia University has hired 2 private security companies to control activities on campus. Each one is headed by Israeli retired IDF people. Wow. That's who's providing extra security on campus.
Go elsewhere.
The IDF trained the cops,
Other questions?
I have a question. I just wonder about the Jewish community itself. Are there generational divisions? We hear that Tom Friedman wrote that he foresees terrible schisms, generational schism within the American Jewish community until this is dealt with in a way that is addressing justice issues. The Slipka Center is the Jewish Center at Yale, which is a multi-million-dollar operation with several full-time rabbis. And I just wonder, how are they doing? I mean, they were a kind of united voice against what I wrote in the paper. And I was immediately labeled by the Jewish Daily News as an anti-Semitic presence, masquerading as a peace-loving Episcopal chaplain.
Okay, so just very quickly, so because I don't want to get too hung up on the Jewish stuff. One is that the Jewish institutional establishment is very, very much dug in with the Jewish sensibility of victimhood and self-protection, and they're being used by conservative elements in this country to keep the system, the elitist system going. So that's one. The second thing is, and this has been my message for so many years, I understand the need to feel that the Jewish community or Jews in general are walking, or even some Jews are walking with you when you take on the cause of Palestine. That it feels uncomfortable to feel like you are alienating, making uncomfortable Jewish friends, colleagues, business associates, family members, when you speak up for Palestine the way you would want to speak up for any oppressed people. And my message has been, I can't tell you what to do, but I agree that it is a major cross to pick up, and I wish you would pick it up. Because if you wait for the Jewish community to walk with you on this, you will wait too long. This is not a Jewish issue. This is not a Jewish problem. This is a human rights issue, like any human rights issue happening in the world today. We Jews have our own family conversation to have. We are struggling within ourselves. Some of it's generational, some of it's not. It doesn't matter. We have to dig ourselves out of this. It's our problem. It's not your problem. Leave us to it and put your own house in order.
I'm gonna make sure other voices are able to enter the conversation. Dana, and then Fred, and then...
I just wanted to say to Mazin that I was here in whenever, 2006, or before that maybe, when you first came to speak. And you were living in this country, and a huge part of your emphasis was on the right to return, which was not something I had thought about or read about or knew about. And 20 years later now, I just want to say it's extraordinary that you're living in the country, that your focus is on hope and nature and abundance in a situation that seems so much of the opposite of that to, if you look at the television news in the United States. And if there's a way, and your institute is a way to lift up that story, I wish that story could be on the front page of the Times.
Thanks. I mean, it's what keeps us going. First of all, for us, this work, a labor of love, is a way to keep our sanity. To be honest, if I wasn't doing what I'm doing 7 days a week, I would be in a mental institution, because the situation is very difficult outside and what's happening. And now, there is an empire being built in the Middle East, so to speak. The Israeli empire will expand soon, and they've already taken part of Syria. I don't know if you heard this part. Jabal al-Sheikh, Mount Hermon, an additional Syrian territory. The Golan Heights is already occupied, and Trump had agreed to recognize Israel's annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights, and now they are taking additional Syrian territory. And other Syrian territories will be annexed to Turkey. The Kurdish areas will be joined with Kurdish areas in Iraq. There's a division of Syria that's going to happen, and then most of the center of it will be under the rule of these jihadist, fanatical Muslims that want to cut your head off if you disagree with them. These are the groups that the US has funded and supported. So if you look at the total picture and geopolitics, you can get very despondent. But what we need to do, as I said, inside the church is light a candle, do something positive. You cannot change the whole world, you can only change what you can change. And by working on what we are doing and creating this oasis of hope in Bethlehem, Bethlehem could provide the way, could provide the light to the world like it did 2,000 years ago. We just have to work at it, and we have to disseminate the information. And so I'm optimistic in some level, or as Gramsci said, I had pessimism of the intellect and optimism of the will. optimism of the will is that hope that we were talking about. So I think we need to just keep going. Thank you.
Thank you for quoting Antonio Gramsci to us. It's good to have his voice in our midst. Fred's hand was up, and then we'll make our way back here.
Okay, so we discussed a lot of global issues, that are very important, but this question is turned to the incredible suffering that's going on among Palestinians, primarily Palestinians, but also Israelis. And the question is, what do you think of Hamas at this point, returning all the hostages, declaring a unilateral ceasefire? I know people may have issues with that view, but if you look forward to the landscape, that might afford a certain kind of moral ground that they could regain and at least save some lives. So is there something that we should be pushing sort of on our side to be more critical, on that end of things?
I mean, Hamas has agreed to the American-Israeli proposal in July 2nd, which was to return all the hostages, exchange prisoners, political prisoners. There are 25,000 Palestinian political prisoners in Israeli jails, and Hamas wants at least some of those people released. Israel has never really been interested in any kind of deal or a ceasefire with Hamas, and Hamas was ready for it, and even agreed to a proposal that they initially saw as unfair in most of the world. Saw as unfair, but they accepted it, and then Israel and the US backtracked on it. And so it's not an issue. And Israel is actually bombing the hostages. 33 of them were killed by the Israeli military. Israel is not interested in returning those hostages. They're interested in using Hamas as a prop for their Middle East agenda, which is building an empire and building an alternative road that stretches from Europe to Asia to change the original Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the new Silk Road, if you want, that $6 trillion were spent on it. So the hostages are pawns, basically, of the Israeli government, not of Hamas. They could have released them on day one if they wanted to. And actually they did do an interim agreement that released some of the hostages by agreement. But Israel is not interested in that, and I think Netanyahu is willing to kill them all, get it over, so that it, not even kill them immediately, but do it slowly so that he has a continuing excuse for expansion, which what he wants, which is to settle Gaza, remove the population of Gaza, because of the gas fields off of Gaza that Israel is now exporting to Europe to replace Russian gas. So there's geopolitical issues that are bigger. There's even also the Ben Gurion Canal, which is to connect the Red Sea with the Mediterranean to replace the Suez Canal. That could bring Israel $6 billion a year, which is what Suez Canal is bringing Egypt. So that's a geopolitical issue. Hamas has gone pretty much. I mean, Hamas is an excuse for what Israel is doing. I'm not a supporter of Hamas, but Hamas was created actually in 1988 with support of Israel, financial and other, letting them work as a religious alternative to the secular PLO. And now the funding and the support for the jihadists in Syria, the radical Muslims, Al-Qaeda basically, that's who they are. The US is supporting Al-Qaeda in the same way they supported the Taliban to fight the Soviet Union, and they support the jihadists in Syria to fight the secular government of Syria. This is the geopolitical big picture that we need to be aware of. But ultimately, you and I cannot control what Hamas does or what Israel does or any of this stuff. We can talk about it and tell, whatever. What we can control is what we behave and do. And that is, as Howard Zinn, wrote a book called You Can't Be Neutral in Moving Train. So you need to get off the train our taxes are funding the genocide and ecocide. I mean, and no matter how, I cannot even begin to describe. I tried to be controlled in the church. I didn't want to talk about starvation, for example. Literally, people are dying of hunger. I sent money to Gaza. A sack of flour, if you can find it, costs $300. A sack of flours, you know. There's no vegetable, no tomatoes, no nothing. People are literally starving and dying of starvation at a much higher rate than those dying of bombing. This is very important. My estimate is that at least 300,000 have already died in Gaza as a result of in the last 12, 13 months. So that's the more urgent thing, not worry about whether Hamas and Israel will come to an agreement. I don't think they will ever do under the current government of Israel because they don't want that agreement. And they assassinated the moderates of Hamas. They assassinated the moderates who could have made an agreement with them. Instead, they got the more radical ones.
Well, when Hamas won the election in 2006, they didn't accept it and they put them in jail. Right? So
Hamas actually did not win elections. Hamas got more votes than Fatah, so they were able to form a government.
Right.
But they still had the minority of the votes of the Palestinians. And the reason Hamas ran for elections is because everybody, including the US, told them if you abandon the armed struggle, if you stop suicide bombings and all of the stuff that you were doing, that I and many others were against anyway, if you do that and run for elections, you'll be like the Sinn Féin, the IRA, left the armed resistance, stopped being terrorists, you can run for elections, you can win things. They ran, and to the surprise of everybody, they got to be able to form a government. But they didn't let them rule, of course. They immediately blockaded them and forced them into a corner, basically, and took power away from them in the West Bank. They are left with some power in Gaza at the time in 2006, but then they did the hermetic seal of Gaza Strip, preventing even pencils from being imported for school. They claim dual purpose. I don't know what dual purposes pencils for school children make. That's what the government of the US and Israel had done. They tricked Hamas to run for elections, and then they pulled the carpet from under them. And Hamas, for 14 years in Gaza, or whatever it was, until they had 2008, 2008, a year and a half after they basically removed them from power, is they started a war on Hamas, 2008. That was the first war on Gaza, and then there was other wars. There was 5 wars on Gaza. This didn't start October 7, 2023, like the Zionists like us to believe. It started much, much earlier, of an attempt to ethnic cleanse Palestine, remove its indigenous people, create a purely Jewish state, which is in the process of being built as we speak. But again, doing political analysis is easy. If you study it, you can make political analysis, and I even predicted what is going to happen. I'm not a prophet, but if you study the variables, you predict that you will have a Gaza ghetto uprising, a la the Warsaw ghetto uprising. But this is not, something that is inevitable. It is something that we can work to stop the next uprising, or the next uprising, or the one after that. This is uprising number 15 for the Palestinians. Why do the Palestinians have 15 uprisings? They just love uprisings, love to be butchered, love to be killed. It is, in South Africa, there were 15 uprisings, by the way, under apartheid also. 15. So I am thinking, hopefully, that the number 15 is magical and it will be the last uprising before the end of this apartheid. I'm not sure, but But the alternative is that we are all going to die. It's not just that people of Palestine are going to die. There's global agendas that are far, far bigger. Even if all Palestinians disappear tomorrow off the face of the earth, producing no problem for Zionism or Israel, what's going to happen? Are we going to have peace? No, these people want more money, more resources, and they want to expand. The US already occupies the eastern parts of Syria, which has the oil and this, that's the nature of the beast of political machinations that have been going on for hundreds of years throughout history. Empires built, Roman Empire goes up, goes down. American Empire goes up, it's going to go down. Israeli Empire now is in the process of building, and it might go down next year or 10 years from now, I don't know, or 100 years from now, if we live that long. But that's a big if, because nuclear weapons are now available to everybody, and we can be in bad, bad, bad danger.
I think,
one more.
well, I think maybe we have one more. We do need to wrap this up. One final. Put us in the hope bucket. How about that?
I don't know, but I don't have any influence at all in the strife going on today. So I'm left with only prayer. And I'm going to pray that some version, some suitable version, adapted from Nelson Mandela's Truth and Reconciliation, be found and made between Palestine and the Gazans and all of Islam and Judaism. That's all I can do.
I mean, Nelson Mandela was actually a believer in armed struggle. Desmond Tutu is the one that led the Peace and Reconciliation Commission. He was a Christian Archbishop of South Africa, Anglican. And Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu always disagreed about tactics of how to liberate South Africa. They both agreed that apartheid must end, but they disagreed on how to end apartheid. One believed in armed resistance. Nelson Mandela never renounced armed resistance. He thought it was the best way. Desmond Tutu always believed in nonviolent resistance. But anyway, what helped in South Africa, and this is a point that's very important, what helped in South Africa was a boycott, divestments, and sanctions movement around the world, led by people of conscience like you and I was involved in that in the 1980s, and that's what helped in South Africa. So we need to apply the same thing on the State of Israel with BDS to get them to reflect and understand that apartheid, racism, ethnic cleansing, genocide, ecocide are not acceptable in the 21st century. But only after apartheid ended, that's when you got the Reconciliation Commission created. You don't create it before that. You create it after you end apartheid. So we must end this notion, this apartheid.
Yes, I agree completely with Mazin. People like to talk about bringing Palestinians and Israelis together to know one another's narratives and to find a way to make peace. You don't do that until you remove the political system that is keeping one people prisoners of another. Quick story, I was in Bears 8 University, which is peopled by students who are very, very, very political. And I was very naive at the time, and we were listening to these 4 students talking about their resistance work. And some of them, I think, probably did believe in environment, in armed resistance as well. But they argued among themselves about it, whatever. It was their conversation. But they're very articulate, and very smart, and very political savvy, and they had very good political analysis. And I raised my hand and I asked this one kid, do you have these conversations with your Jewish counterparts at Hebrew University? He looked at me and he said, no, and I will tell you why. He said, when that Jewish student takes off his IDF uniform and is no longer my jailer at the checkpoints, then we can talk.
All right. Thank you. Listen, thank you once again to Mark Braverman and Mazin from Qumsiyeh. Thank you for being a part of this conversation,
Please donate $5.
and you can have that wing named after you. And Mark has books available in the back if anybody is interested. 5 o'clock at the mosque tonight, 12 o'clock right back here for Bible study tomorrow with Mark. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good rest of your Sunday.